Good evening.
You guys aren't looking quite as feral as I expected. Do you feel it, though, like after being cooped up for how many days? We got some culture tonight. I'm excited. I'm Christa Wessel. I am the morning host at All Classical Portland, which I hope has gotten you through the last few days, right? Thank you for supporting this community-supported radio station. Our guest conductor tonight is Mark Wigglesworth. Would you please welcome him? It's like this in Portland all the time.
I know Sarah, the concertmaster from Minnesota, and this is the first time we work together here, and it just feels like the old days.
You work with Minnesota quite a bit.
I've been there a lot, yeah.
But obviously, from the accent, based in England.
Born and bred, yes.
And your bio says impressive things like the BBC Symphony Orchestra and English National Opera. You'll be their music director starting next season, is that right? Yeah, will you tell us a little bit more about where you go and what you do?
Well, I'm very excited about this new job, which starts next year, because for the last 10 years I've been just a guest conductor, which traveling about 8 months a year. And that's it's a very privileged life, and it's not difficult in the conventional sense. But you just musically, you just get a little bit tired of just being only 1 week with the musicians and the city. And there's a sort of limit. One feels over time there's a limit to what one can achieve in a week. It's thrilling and kind of exciting, but that kind of depth that you get from working with the same musicians over a longer period is something I'm really looking forward to, especially as it's my home.
This is a silly question, and please defer to not answer if you choose, but do you prefer symphony conducting or operatic conducting?
I feel lucky to do both. I miss opera when I'm not doing it, but when I'm doing opera, you pull your hair out so much, you just long for a straightforward symphony week. So it's sort of grass is always greener syndrome. But the joy of opera is obviously the project so much longer, sort of six to 8 weeks, and the humanity that you build up with your colleagues over that time is very special. And every opera project you do, kind of related to what I was just saying, every opera project you do is something that you really get to know the people you're working with, and that ultimately has more meaning.
And it must have been particularly tricky this week, because there was a rehearsal skipped, a Salem concert skipped.
I don't think they're going to recognize me when I walk out here. The last rehearsal we had was Thursday, and that seems a long time ago.
On the way in, I was walking in with a couple of musicians who worked with you at the New World Symphony. You mentioned Minnesota Symphony, so you've got some friends here too. I suspect it'll just be old hat, even though we haven't seen anybody since Thursday.
The New World Symphony is a wonderful thing. I don't know, you may or may not know it. It's a training orchestra down in Miami, and produces, turns out about 30 or 40 great musicians every year. It's a 3-year fellowship program, and what's wonderful going around the fully professional American orchestras is that one's constantly bumping into those people, and that's great. I also met my wife there, so I have special memories with that orchestra.
That's the kind of juicy detail I'm looking for. We're talking about opera. I had the good fortune to interview our guest cellist, Johannes Moser, last week. Perhaps you heard that on Northwest Previews on All Classical Portland. But one of the things that he was most excited about in working with you on this particular Schumann cello concerto was the fact that you were an experienced opera composer, because he feels like the Schumann cello concerto is not like this linear narrative, the way, say, the Dvorak concerto is. It's got this one driving emotion. And Schumann's kind of all over the place, and he thought, I bet Mark Wigglesworth's going to be great with this stark changes of emotion. Do you feel the same way about that Schumann concerto?
I actually think all music is essentially operatic, by which I mean two things. One, it tells a story, obviously in an abstract sense, without the overt narrative, but I think there is still a story there, and it's our job to tell that story, albeit one without words. And the other thing about opera is, of course, it's the singing and the breathing. And I think all music should sing and breathe. And certainly there is a certain freedom, even in classical music, that comes with the singing and the breathing that I try to bring to whatever I do.
Do you, even Johannes was pretty vocal about saying at first he didn't even like this Schumann concerto because it does seem a little disjointed. How can you help us make sense of it?
I'm really relieved to hear he said that. When I first started looking at this, it is so weird. It is, but in a way that's brilliant. We kind of assume Schumann is basically a sort of classical composer, one step after Beethoven, but still in that kind of world. And we're shocked every time he just goes on a little wander somewhere. But now that I know it better, you really sense that the personality, and I mean that in the most specific sense behind it, where it is truly individual voice speaking. Schumann was, shortly after writing this piece, was admitted to a mental asylum for the rest of his life. And the question I would ask you to think about when you're listening to it is this a madman surrounded by sane people or a sane person surrounded by mad people? Because there's a very big argument to suggest that he shouldn't have gone into a mental asylum, and that was just the convention of the time. And I do think you hear, it's obviously a bit of a cliche, when you any concerto is one person against a lot, and with a lot, and I do think you hear that tension in this piece more than most concertos.
It does seem like it jumps from emotion to emotion a little bit, but framed in Schumann's mental state, maybe that makes a little bit more sense?
I've resisted a lot of Schumann because the main job of the conductor is, at a high level, like this orchestra, is to set the emotional tone for a piece of music. So, by which I mean Tchaikovsky or Mahler is obviously very hot and passionate, and Mozart and Haydn is quite calm and cool, and there's obviously stereotypes, but that's what I'm talking about. And they're very easy for that reason because they're very clear how hot or how cool they are. Schumann, Mendelssohn, those sort of composers are in the middle, and I find that a difficult balance to get, and I've often resisted conducting Schumann because if I don't know the temperature, then I'm not going to be able to unify the musicians into finding something for this week.
What's the temperature of the Ludoslavsky?
That's a really good question, because on the one hand it's very passionate, but on the other hand it's very elegant. And I actually shared a concert with Ludoslavsky conducting. I was conducting half and he was conducting half, coincidentally around the time he was writing this piece, and it was about just over 20 years ago. And I was doing Bartok, I think, and came off stage incredibly sort of sweaty and sort of beginner's bravado, feeling that I'd just done the sort of Leonard Bernstein tour de force. And he looked at me rather quizzically, because when he came off, having conducted a piece that was even more energetic, not a bead of sweat, not a thing of hair out of place, he was an incredibly elegant gentleman, real gentleman. And I do think, although the music is strong in the obvious sense, I do think you hear that sort of precision and clarity behind what he's written.
When I listen to this, I get images of, well, maybe it's not too far off the weather we've been having, not that chilly perhaps, but I hear some rain maybe, or darkness.
You know, I don't really like telling people exactly what I feel, because people, when you listen to it, was that the rain? Was that the rain? So, I mean, I would just urge you to, I feel a little bit like a doctor saying, sit back, relax, it's not going to hurt. But I would urge you just to allow the music to take your imagination wherever you want it to go. And I think when everyone hears a new piece, there's a certain pressure, perhaps, to understand it in some way. Well, I don't understand Beethoven, I don't understand any music. Music is far more mysterious and wonderful than than something the brain can intellectualize. And I think we get that when we listen to familiar music. We're happy to be taken somewhere, wherever our imagination wants to lead us. But somehow when we listen to a new piece, we feel like we should get it in some sense. And I would urge you not to have that pressure and just to allow the music to take you wherever it takes you, and know that that is a completely valid place. And if you all ended up having the same imaginative experience, that would be fascinating, but it would also be fascinating if there were 1,500 different places that you went to. So I would rather not be specific about what the piece. Obviously, I have images because I think I need them to focus the musicians into what, so that we provide you with something unified. But I would hope that unity offers you the opportunity for whatever you want.
I need more specifics, though. It's maybe for a lot of us, this will probably be the first and maybe only time we'll ever hear this symphony, right? So it's in one movement. It's about 20 minutes long-ish. Any tips on what to listen for, the little hooks that we can clue into?
I'm going to stick to my guns on this one.
You're a tough nut to crack.
I can share with you one aspect of it, which is every now and again I stop conducting in the conventional sense and look a little bit more like a traffic policeman directing traffic telling certain musicians to do certain things at certain times. And I think you'll be able to see that there's a lot of freedom involved in that, and that this is something that Lutosławski cared about a great deal, was that when you have a new piece of music, it's technically demanding for the players as well as for the listeners. And the result of that is that sometimes the players feel unable to really express themselves because they are focusing so much on the technique of playing the notes. By forcing us to choose more about what we play when, he's forcing us to be more creative. And I think you can sense that coming from the musicians, and that kind of pervades the piece. And it also makes it obviously unique, so because every night one chooses in a slightly different. He's given you parameters of it's not complete anarchy, but within that world you get to choose, and on any given night it's different. And I think the spontaneity of the piece also comes through very strongly.
All right, I'll let it go at that.
Well, I would just say one thing about it, which is it's not to answer your question, but it's the challenge of all new modern composers is how to. This is the reason I love this piece particularly and love playing it to audiences. The challenge is how does the composer say something original without alienating the audience? Of course, if it's too advanced, then the audience can't come with it, and the communication isn't there. If it's too familiar, too accessible, then it doesn't need to be said in the first place. You may as well listen to something you know. And that challenge of how to balance novelty with tradition is, I think, really important for living composers, and he is the master of that.
Speaking of familiar, Beethoven's Seventh. I would guess that most of us here have probably heard this symphony before. How do you approach something so utterly familiar?
I would love this concert, you to walk out feeling that Lutosławski you'd heard before and feeling that the Beethoven you'd never heard before. I think when you approach a piece that everybody obviously knows, you're not self-consciously trying to make it different, but you're hoping that your approach is one that allows it to feel different, new, fresh. It's actually, I think, the most modern piece of the three we're doing, even though it's the oldest. To try to recreate how shocking it must have been at the premiere, some of the things that we think of as very familiar must have been incredibly anarchic, and to recreate that for your ears that are 200 years more experienced is the challenge.
So what are some of those things that were so revolutionary at the time?
It takes a while to get going. There's a very long introduction. That was not normally, ba-ba-ba-ba, and we're off. This is a long, I don't know how many minutes, but it feels a spacious opening, as if to say we're on a long journey. you'll hear quite a lot of harmonic dissonances, which don't sound dissonant to us anymore because we're so used to them. But if we can bring out the clashes that are there, that would be useful.
When I think about this particular Beethoven symphony, I think the word exuberance, that last movement in particular, the one that Wagner called the apotheosis of the dance, it's hard just to stay still in the seat.
Nor should you. I mean, feel free to. There are some cultures for whom the word for dance and the word for music are the same, and I feel that's with this no better example of that with this piece. But it's not just foot tapping. As you say, it's really inside that vitality and as you say, exuberance. Yeah.
Yeah, and you think about where Beethoven was in his life when he wrote this, not in a very exuberant place. But I guess that's the work of the artist, right? To transcend your personal space, to do something more universal.
I think it's for all of us, that's what music's about. We come here, we've all got our stuff going on in our lives, so we've all got, whatever's going on here or here, and we can come to a place and we can be taken to a totally different world. And Beethoven took himself to a completely different world, which is a wonderful gift that he's given us to enable us to do something similar.
I'm thinking about you once again, talking about where you're off to after this. You've spent a week here in snowy Oregon. You're off to Colorado next, is that right?
Yeah, will it be snowy there?
Undoubtedly, yeah. Minnesota and Utah, you get around.
Yep.
I'm just trying to tap into the fact that we're just delighted that you've spent a week with us here in Oregon.
Very happy to be here, indeed. And great to finally do a concert. I've worked out, rather sadly, I've been here 120 waking hours, and I've only worked for 8 of them. So I'm really looking forward to tonight.
What have you been doing as the city's been under siege? Trapped in the hotel?
Well, actually, joking aside, most of the conductor's work is done on his own, studying scores. So it actually has been a good opportunity to do some of that.
We're looking forward to seeing what happens tonight. The one and only opportunity to see this concert tonight, because Saturday night Salem concert got canceled last night. So I'm excited to see the spontaneity of tonight's event. This is our guest conductor, Mark Wigglesworth. I'd like to thank you for coming in out of the snow and rain and getting some culture with us this evening.
Thank you.